Fill her up.
You're listening to the Gas Digital Network.
Good afternoon, Michael Malice here. Let that be your welcome for the next hour. We have with us yet again another Dave Smith. I got a note from the producer, but that worked out perfectly. No, the comic Dave Smith, that is. Have you reached out to whoever owns Dave Smith? The handle on Twitter?
No.
Do you know who it is?
No, and until you mentioned it right now, I never even thought to do it. I do not have a very good business mind.
Okay, well, that's genetically impossible.
Yeah.
Wait, I mean, I don't know, but it was Ralph. When Ralph did my show, he had some great insights, and one of the insights he had, which I always pass on to people, is make sure you have the same username across all different platforms. And you are Comic Dave Smith and everything, aren't you?
No, I think just Twitter. And then I'm not on Instagram, which again, I probably should be.
Okay.
I was like Kodak when Kodak was the biggest thing in film, and then when digital came out, Kodak was like, we're not getting into digital. It's just we'll be the film people. Let someone else go toy around with this digital. It's not going to pick up. And then it became the entire industry, and they fell apart. That was me with Instagram. When Instagram came out, I was like, this is stupid. Pictures? Who cares?
So you're too important for Instagram.
That's right. They couldn't handle the amount of followers I would surely get.
Or how quickly you get verified, which Ralph has. I think Shannon's verified now. I'm still not verified, even though Rogan's yelled at them publicly twice.
I mean, and then you'll get like these you'll see like people with like 300 followers who are verified, and you're like, what the fuck?
Well, no, that's on Twitter because they're journalists. So Twitter wants them to be able to write nice things. And Instagram, I don't know what the situation is there, and it is something that bothers me a little bit, not too much. I'm wondering if it's gorgeous out now.
Mm-hmm.
The weather has changed. It's lovely spring weather. I took a very long walk yesterday with my friend. I think at this point, it feels like people are looking around in New York and being like, this is all bullshit, right? Like, yeah, we don't need to be doing this. And they're kind of de facto being like, yeah, I think it's almost kind of this, not even civil disobedience, but like everyone's just like, what are we doing? We're just getting, it's like when you know what it is? It's like when the party ends. No one turns on the lights, but everyone just looks around. It's like, I think it's time to go. And everyone just gets up and leaves somehow. Like this weird flock of birds. Are you getting that vibe as well?
Yeah, I think like all across the country, and probably in other countries as well. But it's like, I think also at first people are very scared, and they're like, okay, well, we got to stay in for a month. We got to social distance. Now it's been a couple months, and it's just so anti-human to be living this way. And I think people start, they're looking at their friend and they're like, yeah, I think we should hang out. And then they're looking at their grandmother and they're like, I mean, she's going to die soon anyway, right? So it's very, like, it's so weird and anti-human to live this way. So I think this is starting to happen.
Yeah, and... Yeah. Did you watch over the weekend? Here's something that I think is interesting, phenomenal. Let's talk politics. I'm sure you probably saw or read about. I always forget how to pronounce her name. Is it Mika or Micah? It's Micah, right?
It's Mika, is what they say. That's what they say on the show.
Okay, so Mika Brzezinski had Biden on.
Yes. And
she very calmly, very matter-of-factly asked him some 101 questions about Tara Reade. It was almost like he was literally crapping his pants right on stage. I couldn't believe how ill-prepared he was. That possibly could be. Well, let me ask you, why do you think he came off so poorly prepared? Or am I misunderstanding it?
No, I think you're right. But the last episode that me and you recorded for my show, we were talking all about this, talking about the Tara Reade accusation. We were talking about how Chris Hayes was getting, calls for him to be fired on Twitter. And
Yeah.
one of those things that always happens, it's annoying when it happens when you talk politics and current events. When I get off the call with you, and I went on my phone on Twitter, and right there I see Joe Biden's campaign has announced, he'll be talking about the Tara Reade accusations tomorrow morning on Morning Joe.
Oh, let me correct you, because not correct you, interject. I didn't know that. Thank you for telling me this. The impression I had was that don't want to say ambushed him, but that basically she asked him questions he wasn't expecting and he was ill prepared. Yes. So he knew a day ahead of time.
Yes, it's worse. It's worse than you thought it was.
Oh,
yes,
this was much
prepared.
Worse.
This was decided by the campaign that we will go on and discuss this for the first time. We will take questions about this tomorrow, which in itself is kind of a red pill moment about how the corporate press works with the Democratic establishment. That it's not that it's thrown at him. It's that he gets to decide. Now you guys are allowed to ask me about this. And Mika was not easy on him. She was not super hard on him, but she was certainly maintaining, stepping into this area where you can't say I didn't ask him about this and ask several times, but she didn't bring up the corroborating evidence. She didn't bring up any of that stuff that, she could have very easily. They also could have had her on. Only Fox News has had this woman on, which they've asked her. Excuse me, I apologize.
They've all asked her,
but she hasn't been invited on MSNBC, and that is kind of in itself.
No, she has. I think they all have asked.
I had heard.
My understanding is they had all asked. All the networks have now officially asked.
Maybe
her.
I'm wrong about that, but at the time, this is what I had heard, that MSNBC hadn't reached out to her.
Well, she's no Julie Swetnick.
Well, that's right. She's not a credible accuser like Miss Swetnick. I thought Joe Biden did so poorly because he's Joe Biden, and this is about the best you can get out of him. He's very, very bad at these things. He, between the stuttering and the confusion, and he just doesn't, Mika would ask these questions. There's just nothing there. You're trying to pull an answer out of someone who doesn't have one. And to me, the most memorable part of the interview was when she pressed him on the fact that he was one of the people when Kavanaugh was being accused that said we have to believe women. And he tried to spin that into, well, what I mean is we have to listen to their accusation and treat them seriously and then find out what happened. And it's like this weird Orwellian thing where you can't convince me what the word believe means. You can't convince me.
You can't convince me what I saw you all doing last year.
Yes.
This wasn't a generation ago. This wasn't, let's go to the what do you call that thing in the library where you have the film and you got to put up on the screen these old newspapers. I already forget what it's called. We had to do this when we were kids. They would have the old newspapers on reels and you'd have to spool it and project it onto the thing, whatever. I'm being a boomer. But yeah, it was very, but here's where I disagree with you, because whether or not you thought Biden won the debate against Paul Ryan in 2012, no one will say he didn't hold his own. Right. So this was only 8 years ago. So at some point, this man, Paul Ryan's no dummy. I'm not a fan of his, but he's not, some complete Twitter idiot. So the fact is, as of 8 years ago, he could hold his own at the very least with Paul Ryan. Now, when she's asking obvious, just basic logical questions, instead of at least having some political BS and just spouting off talking points and sticking to it, he literally just sat and stared at her. There's a woman in the UK who I would encourage all of our viewers to look up, named Diane Abbott. And she is really one of the greatest politicians in Britain, because she is such a combination of like stupid and putting her foot in her mouth, but they keep putting her on because she's black and she's high up in the Labour Party leadership. So for example, when she went to vote, she had both shoes on of different shoes, and they were both the left shoe. That kind of thing. And you're watching there's photos. It's wait a minute, not only are they mismatched, but they're both for the left foot. You're like, how is this woman literally can't dress herself, right? And there was one interview she had where she was on with Piers Morgan, and she was saying, Piers, the Tory immigration system is a complete disaster. When Labour's in, we won't be having this sort of ambiguity. And Piers okay, cool. You're the shadow secretary for this issue. if here's a situation, like this guy, he has some hypothetical, right? He's like, let's suppose my dad is British and I'm not, and I'm born on other soil. Do I get to stay or do I get deported, right? Like, she goes, Piers, it's terrible what the Tories are doing. And he's like, wait, okay, I got you. Would Labour, under Tory rule, this guy gets deported? Would it be different under Labour? And she goes, Piers, it's not working what the Tory party is doing. And he asks her like 3 times, and she's like, are you going to, he says, are you going to answer me? And she goes, I already have. But the point is, she kept sticking to her guns and saying something, right? So at the very least, you can have the, like, if you don't speak English and look at the screen, it looks like someone who's talking and communicating ideas. This Biden interview, for those who haven't seen it, Mika goes, okay, you let them look up in this set of documents any references to Tara Reade, right? But in the University of Delaware, you're not letting them look it up. Why not? And he goes, well, I've got a lot of things there, like personal notes, like notes with foreign leaders. These can be misconstrued and used for campaign fodder, which, by the way, is an example not to release anything ever, but that's neither here nor there. You're in a campaign. Things are going to be made misconstrued. This is what you do all the time. Then she goes, okay, that's fair. Why don't you let them just search for only Tara Reade's name and none of this other Putin stuff, Xi Jinping, none of this foreign affairs. Fine, we got you. And he goes, because they wouldn't be there. And he goes, okay, why don't you let them search? And he goes, what's your point? What point are you trying to make? And then he goes, who would be conducting this search? And it's like, these aren't like insurmountable questions where it's like, well, since you can't tell me who's going to be doing the search, I can't release it. And she goes, oh, I don't know, a commission, a bunch of people from the media. And he just stared at her. And I was absolutely, to use a Britishism, gobsmacked to see this happen. So I don't think it's just he's just Joe Biden.
Well, I mean, when you say he's just Joe Biden, then you compare him to Joe Biden 8 years ago. I'm talking about Joe Biden today, and these have been a rough 8 years for Joe Biden. He has lost a step. He was never that clever to begin with. Right. He always thought he was more clever than he was, but he actually now has trouble putting a sentence together. And then there was one point in the interview where there was just like dead air. Like he just didn't respond and didn't say anything, and Mika was kind of waiting for him to, and then it went back to her and she pushed him again. And he does these things like what he did in the debate several times, where he'd just run out of steam before his time was over.
Right.
And you're talking about like 45 seconds you have to fill. Right. It's really not a lot of time at all. There is no issue that any one of us, anyone who remotely pays attention to politics, can't speak for 45 seconds on. And it's politics, so you can change the framing and talk about whatever you want to. And he would just, in the middle of the 45 seconds, go, anyway.
You're out of time.
And I guess that's it. I'm going to run out of time soon anyway. Everyone else at these things gets the ding, ding, ding because they're going over and they're trying to get more talking points in. It's very weird, but I think he is kind of counting on the fact that the media will continue to cover for him. I don't know.
Here's my theory, and you're the first person I'm discussing this with, so I want to hear your thoughts. I think what we're seeing, because there's a lot of data points that weren't adding up for me, right? And then I sit there, I'm like, all right, if something's not adding up, my math's wrong, let me go back and look at my work. So here's my theory right now, and I could be totally off, and if I am, please, let's figure this out. I think what's happening is that it wasn't that 2020 was between the corporatist Democrats, like the Biden wing and Klobuchar types, and the Bernie AOC democratic socialist types. I think what we're seeing is a battle between the corporate press and the Democratic Party for the left and for control of the left. Because you saw Chris Hayes go out against Biden. Just be on, like, being objective. He didn't even come out against Biden. He came out for objectivity. You saw Mika. You saw, I keep forgetting her name, from CNN, asked this of Pelosi. And you've seen this with several other venues. So the fact that they're asking Democratic politicians, which is not how I don't think I would have expected this to go down a year ago. And I don't think it's, even if they are trying to be honest, I don't think it's solely honesty. There's got to be something else usually going on, because you do have a boss. You do have ratings. These are powerful people. If you're going to piss off Nancy Pelosi as an individual for a corporation, you better have a damn good reason for it. So that is my theory is what's going on, because I think the media is the one which far more pushed impeachment on terms than the Democratic Party did in many ways. Nancy Pelosi didn't want it as much as Don Lemon did. Oh, and Don Lemon asked Stacey Abrams about it. That was another one about Joe Biden. And just yesterday, Jake Tapper asked Gretchen Whitmer about it at length. So this how do you explain that in your mind then?
I think there's so there's been a dynamic for a long time on with the Democrats where and I guess there's versions of this on the Republican side as well, where they'll have talking points that appeal to their base that they have no interest in whatsoever. Like people like Hillary Clinton doesn't care about women's rights or the struggles of black people, or she doesn't care about any of the socialist stuff that she'd talk about. She's a power broker, she's a corporatist, but she knows that a lot of her base really cares about the minimum wage or racism or these other things. So she plays to that. And you can demonstrably see this throughout history. When something else suited her, she would play to that. So, like gay marriage is the easiest example, right? But she was like firmly against gay marriage until her base changed their mind. And then it's like, oh, I'm firmly for gay marriage. Meanwhile, she's like, if I get my war in Libya, I don't give a fuck if the gays get married or not. She just doesn't care. It's just politics. And I think that
it's not like this is someone who values the sanctity of marriage like this woman.
Right. Yes, exactly. Yes, she doesn't have any opinions on any of this stuff. Yeah, it's
like, the conservative argument, if you allow two men to get married, it's going to diminish what marriage means. And she's like, yeah, I don't think this value can be in how much less. I don't really think that's going to speak to me. Sorry, gays.
Yeah, like really. She's like, it can't get any worse, gays. Have at it. Have at it, gays. Get in there.
Hey guys, Michael Malice here. Want to tell you about one of my favorite sponsors, Sheath Underwear. I wear them all the time. If you go to exclusively, you go to sheathunderwear.com and use promo code Malice20, you get 20% off your order. I just got in the mail all 4 colors of their camo. So my genitals have gone from microscopic to hidden. What's Sheath? Okay, it's smart underwear with a lot of different styles, and it includes a brief with a dual pouch that makes you feel like part of your anatomy is like floating on clouds. It's got one part for one part of your anatomy, another part for your other part of your anatomy. It sounds kooky. I tried them on. I'm like, this is the most comfortable underwear I've ever worn. They also have female underwear. I don't know what's going on downstairs with you guys, ladies. So that's on you. If you go to sheathunderwear.com and use promo code Malice20, you'll get amazing underwear that's comfortable, that's moisture wicking, doesn't get you sweaty. And that will be something that will make your glutes look great. And I speak from experience. Sheathunderwear.com, Malice20 for 20% off. Guess what? 100% money back guarantee for your first pair. Get it? Pair. Get it? Get it? Sound like Gino. Okay, back to the show.
But so this has always been a little bit of a struggle. And I think that particularly in the last few years, it's gotten away from them a little bit. And to me, what it seems like to me is that everybody wants to maintain power, but they realize that they will lose their power if they don't corral in the base to some degree. And so I think that this thing got so big on social media that the corporate press realized we are going to seriously be undermined if we don't address this in some way. Now, my guess is that they work together, the press and the Democratic establishment, to work out how they're going to cover this. And oftentimes they pit people against each other as enemies who really aren't enemies. So I don't know, but there were Nancy Pelosi didn't want to impeach over the Mueller investigation. She didn't. And you saw some people in the media push it, but not a huge amount. And then when she was ready to do it over the Ukraine gate stuff, then you saw the press really go hard for it. So it still seems to me like they're working in concert. But I think there are probably, just like anything else with any type of like conspiracy theory, it's never one monolith that's all working in lockstep. There are different factions and different people who have different ideas about how to move forward. So I don't know. I think it's interesting to speculate about, but I think that this seemed to me like they thought this was the best way for Biden to handle this situation?
uh it's like being like the tallest dwarf, right? Like, this is as good as, there was that Simpsons episode where they had a film festival. I was saying Boo Earns, and there's just this one scene in the movie that Mr. Burns entered in the film festival, and he just calls for the cavalry, and then the horse is dragging him around by his ankle, like back and forth, to the audience's laughter, and he just turns to Smithers and goes, 15 takes and that was the best one. So it's just like, yeah, maybe this is Biden at his best. But the thing is, like, I don't know if you saw the Gretchen Whitmer interview with Jake Tapper. I covered it today on yesterday on Nightshade. She got angry, and she's and like, I don't want it. She actually says, like, I'm done talking about this. So that is something, when you lose your cool and you're basically telling a journalist, don't ask me about this, that is waving red meat, and that does not play very well to the audience. And I do think I went back. I had thought that the expression was believe women, and that believe all women was something conservatives made up to straw man what the left was saying, right? This was my genuine belief, because I'm like, okay, they're very different conceptually. To say believe women, you should give them the benefit of the doubt, which I don't think that's implausible, and that if someone is making this accusation, more often than not, something bad had happened, right? And Molly Hemingway, she's like, nope, sweetie. Like, well, she didn't say sweetie, but she gave me the receipts. And that literally was the hashtag believe all women, which
Yeah.
I still don't understand even from a Machiavellian perspective, why you would put that. And so when they're asked, like the Stacey Abrams and Gretchen Whitmer are asked about this, and they're just saying, look, it's not congruous with Joe Biden's past behavior. He doesn't have a history of this, blah, blah, blah. Fair. Brett Kavanaugh's not Trump. Like, if this was Christine Blasey Ford accusing Trump, we could all be like, okay, he says he doesn't drink, but I would not put this past him, especially at that age, in the slightest. I'm sure he did it. This is Brett Kavanaugh.
But yeah,
The idea that Brett Kavanaugh is somehow more of like a pervert or a lech than Joe Biden is false, especially because this accusation is when he's a powerful senator from Tara Reade, whereas with Kavanaugh, it's when he was in high school. So basically, something bad happened in high school. Let's suppose it's true. And then till now, there's no allegations. Where's the pattern there? So it's really hilarious for us red pill people to watch them scramble to kind of resolve this contradiction using excuses that don't make sense on their face.
Yeah. Well, it's wokeism ends up painting people into these corners that are impossible to get out of. I almost feel bad for them sometimes. I mean, I remember through the earlier stages of the Democratic primary, watching people like Beto O'Rourke and even Joe Biden and some of them try to wiggle out of these positions that are so contradictory. Like, they'll be like, I'm going to pick a female vice president because we need more women in positions of leadership and people of color in positions of leadership. But I'm a white man and I want to be president. And these weird things where you're like, but then what? Why are you here? Like, if you believe this makes no sense. And what Joe Biden was trying to juggle is, I almost felt bad because it's this impossible situation where, okay, so first he's going to come out and categorically deny it, obviously, because there's no other option. I mean, if this happened, he can't be like, yeah, look, it happened. I forcefully fingered this chick. I'm sorry, but let's get down to the business of running for president. Like, that just can't. That's not an option. So he has to categorically deny it. But then he also has to say these very weird things like, so he goes, well, what I meant by believe women, of course, is not, it's such a simple statement. Yeah. Everyone knows what that means. But he goes, well, I think they should have the presumption of belief, that we should presume that they're telling the truth. And it's like, okay, well, if that's the case, then you're the one who needs to go find fucking that there weren't any documents there, because we're starting with the presumption that you're a sexual assaulter, right? So now you have to prove yourself innocent. But then he's basically like, then we have to look at the facts on the ground, and there's no evidence of this. It's like, wait, but you just said she gets the presumption of innocence. So the evidence needs to be produced on your side now. And there were like 3 or 4 different examples of these where it's just like, it's such a contradiction. And I almost feel bad for them. What can you do in this situation?
Yeah, right. They paid, but that's the whole thing. I remember when Mitch McConnell was minority leader, and Senator Harry Reade was thinking of doing the nuclear option with Supreme Court with nominees. I don't know for appointments to eliminate the filibuster, which had been around since I think the founding fathers era. And Mitch McConnell goes, "Dude, I'm warning you. You're going to pull this now, and then we're going to be in the majority, and you're going to regret it. I'm telling you right now." And Harry Reid's like, "Well, I don't have to worry about tomorrow. I'm just worried about today." And it's like, all right. And they did it, and the Republicans followed suit, and there was no grounds for them to even pretend to complain. It's like, this is what, and same thing here. It's just like, okay, I get you want to go nuclear in a Supreme Court. You think the Senate, because they thought the Senate was in reach, right? They thought, okay, we're going to pull out all the stops. You cost yourselves the Senate and this seat, and now you've radicalized a lot of people on the right, and you've also red pilled a lot of people in the middle. Like, how did you think this is going to play out?
That was a backfire.
But I think, you know what? I think they did think it was going to play out the way they wanted, because historically it worked.
Perhaps, and also I think that power is very tempting, and when you can just grab it in the moment, people aren't so concerned about what the future might hold. And Harry Reid's out of there anyway, so for him, he got more power in the moment.
Yeah, there was that great moment from Lindsey Graham where he goes, "Wow, you all want power so bad. I hope you never get it." I think he, it's funny. It's hard for us to tell, how much of it's grandstanding, how much of this is their conviction. But it did seem, and I read Molly Hemingway's book, she talked about this. It did seem that he fundamentally was very disturbed by what was going on. And I can't say I blame him, especially with the Julie Swetnick stuff.
Yeah, and I'm no fan of Lindsey Graham, and
he's no Mitt Romney.
Yeah, he's no Mitt. He really isn't. He's a little radical for my taste. But I don't want him to have any power. I don't like that he has the power he has. But I also think that there was something a little bit different about the Kavanaugh situation, where from Lindsey Graham's perspective, they were taking off the gloves in a brutal way and going after one of them. I think that he saw Kavanaugh as one of him. You know what I mean? Point. And even with like Clarence Thomas, stuff like that, I mean, it was dirty what they did to him, but it wasn't this. They were accusing him of making inappropriate jokes. It's a very different thing than considering somebody like a serial rapist. This was like a different thing. And I do think he was legitimately outraged that they would, with, no evidence, just
no shame.
Yes, no shame, not holding back at all. To this day, I said it when we spoke last, but I haven't seen anybody. That doesn't mean it hasn't happened, just that I haven't seen it, and I do pay attention to this stuff. I haven't seen anybody go after Biden the way they went after Kavanaugh. I mean, where they would just completely, back then, believe women actually meant believe women. It was, oh, this happened. We are treating this as if this happened. We're also going to pretend that this was rape, even though in the Kavanaugh, Christine Ford situation, that's not what the accusation was. And we're just going to, we're looking at this human being as a rapist, and we're putting a rapist on the Supreme Court. Nobody seems to be treating Biden that way. And good, because that was outrageous.
Yeah. So every time this happens, I'm always wondering, so is that your prediction or is that your instinct that the higher ups in the Democratic Party sat down and are thinking about an exit plan vis-a-vis Biden?
I wouldn't say yet it's my prediction, but I think there's like a 30% chance that they end up getting Biden out of there. So I think like a very plausible scenario. And it just seems to me that there's no way they can let this guy do this. But then you look at the reality of the situation on the ground and you're like, well, he's the presumptive nominee. They still haven't pulled this Hail Mary yet. So it's not exactly my prediction, but I would predict that it's a possibility.
Yeah, here's the other thing. I tweeted this out, which is Bernie only endorsed Hillary. He ended his campaign in June of 2016. He endorsed her in July. John Kasich folded his campaign in like May 5th, 2016. Hillary only ended, I think, in June of 2008 against Obama. The claim that he's locked in as the nominee, first of all, the convention hasn't happened, so even according to the rules, he's not the nominee. Yeah. But that it's a given 3 months out from the convention, let alone 6 months out from the election, that he's the nominee, I makes no sense. So it just seems that presumption is something that's going to start imploding, I think, pretty soon, pretty quickly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that anything, as you said, anything up until the convention can change. And then even after the convention, if it was a health issue, things can change at that point. So it's far from over. And you just have to think, particularly, it's like with all of the things that are going on, it's not only that Biden is who Biden is, it's also the fact that Cuomo and Gavin Newsom, am I saying that right? The California governor.
Yes.
Both of them are on TV every day. They're exerting their authority. They're claiming to be protecting the people or whatever, the narrative is. And they're both reasonably competent and younger and just present much better, and they can finish a goddamn sentence, and as far as I know are not credibly accused of sexual assault. And it just seems like this would be the move. Like I said to you before, it seems like if I were one of these bigwig Democratic donors, I would be like, this is obviously what we're doing, so you tell me how we get there.
Yeah, it seems very clear that it wasn't that they wanted to nominate Biden, it's that they need to stop Bernie, which they did. And I'm kind of surprised a little bit at how badly and how hard he folded. And why do you think that is? I don't have a good explanation, Bernie.
So I've speculated a lot about this on my show.
On my tinfoil hat.
I sure have. Tinfoil hat. Shout out to Sam Tripoli. That's a great show.
I'm gonna be honest.
Well, you have one.
Yeah.
Are you?
Yeah.
Oh, very good. He's great. So look, I think there's a couple possibilities here. And one is that Bernie Sanders just does not have any fight in him. Like, he's just kind of a wimp when it comes down to actually fighting for these things. Although, I'll tell you, man, when Bloomberg jumped in the race, he really didn't have a problem going at him. I think he does really hate billionaires.
Yeah.
And that was able to fuel him in that. But the other thing, and I got to tell you, I'm surprised about this. Let me say this as just an aside. So Stefan Molyneux just debated this guy Ben Burgess, who I debated back in the day, Democratic Socialist guy. And Molyneux will make this point a lot of times when he debates socialists, and it seems to not resonate with socialists at all. But it does resonate with me. And the point he'll make is he'll be like, okay, well, you're like a socialist. But what do you do for the working class? I mean, you teach at some college, you take taxpayer money from the working class. They can only get access to your mind if they can afford this outrageously high tuition. Do you put your lectures online for free? Do you give any of your, are you giving anything back to this class that you supposedly care so much more than the rest of us about? And they always, it doesn't resonate with them at all. And when Bernie Sanders' tax returns first came out in 2016, I thought this was going to be devastating for Bernie Sanders. I was shocked by how much his supporters just brushed it off. But he itemized his deductions, so he would pay the least amount of taxes possible. He got down to 13% that he paid, and he had made $300,000 that year. And then he gave another 2% away to charity. So he paid 15%. While being in close to the top 1%. And he's advocating everybody else and you're like, if income inequality is so horrible, go give some of your money away. Yeah. I mean, this is outrageous that you don't practice what you preach. And it was just nothing. But to me, that does say something. And I wonder if the fact that, and after that, by the way, he went on and made over $1 million the next 2 years. So I wonder, this Bernie Sanders, who's so concerned with income inequality, but then has no problem making millions of dollars and keeping it all for himself, if maybe he's just a fucking hypocrite. And this was never really about a revolution. And that doesn't mean that that's in the front of his mind. And that's what he says. Maybe he's convinced himself of his bullshit, but maybe he just wants to write another book, make another few $1 million, and live a comfortable life. Just speculating.
Or maybe when he was in the hospital after his heart attack, they're like, all right, Bernie, here's how it's going to be. We're going to save you this time, and you're going to walk the plank, and next time you'll be fine as well. But if not, these machines have a way of turning themselves off.
Well, listen, I know it's like putting on the tinfoil hat, but if you just look at the actual reality of the situation, you'd be crazy to not entertain conspiracy theories a little bit. And the truth is that the the people who run the world, the people in the State Department, in the CIA, in the Pentagon, these people will napalm children
Oh yeah.
to get more power. They are not. I think that's a Michael Heiss line, by the way. I don't mean to steal that from him, but these are people who will do really crazy things. They will lie to start a war. They will do so. The idea that they wouldn't use, any of these other options to try to get a political result that they want domestically. It's this weird kind of wall that people have up between foreign and domestic policy,
Yeah, yeah.
where they're like, well, I know they'll slaughter children in Iraq, but they would never hurt a kid here. But then I'd say, look at like Waco or something like
Oh
that.
yeah, it's a
Or,
great example.
look at Operation Northwood or something where they had plans to do this stuff here. It's really not beyond the realm of possibility.
Hey guys, Michael Malice here. Want to tell you about these cool wallets called The Ridge. If you go to ridge.com/malice and use code MALICE, easy to remember, free shipping, free returns, 20% off. What is Ridge? They're wallets launched on Kickstarter, just like me, 2013. I was 2012. They're made of 2 metal plates bound together with a durable elastic band. Very sleek. Looks nothing like traditional wallet. Very cool to bust out on dates or job interviews. You could have your American Psycho scene in real life, because they'd be like, oh, what's your wallet made out of? Oh, this? It's either titanium or carbon fiber or aluminum, something for everyone. They'll be like, oh, how can I get that? You'll go, well, you don't want to, he said, bitch, you're not stealing my look, but you and I will know if you go to ridge.com/malice and use code MALICE, you get 10% off, over a dozen styles and colors, looks totally unique. Free shipping, free returns, 10% off if you use the promo code. How cool is that? Let's get back to the show. Yeah, I got someone sent me a tweet that was a really good question. They said, what part of your book, Dear Reader, about North Korea did you most agree with? And I'm like, that's a great question. And I gave it some consideration. And the 2 things I said was, one is how absolutely devastating the Korean War was to the Korean people, because you do in the south, and then you have Russia and China in the north, and the Koreans are in the middle, and they're going to be just slaughtered and the country just leveled. And that's what ended up happening. And yeah, you could say the alternative is the gulags in Kim Il-sung, and sure, that's fair. But at the same time, even though the benefit might be outweigh the cost was still astronomical. And we forget that. And it's easy for us to forget. It's not easy for the Korean people to forget that. But the other point I made, which I was proud of, and I guess I had the same realization as Michael, is when Kim Jong-il is talking about how the US thinks they're so hot and North Korea is so evil, they go, by your own admission, Lyndon Johnson in 1968 escalated the Vietnam War, which means necessarily Americans getting killed, civilians getting killed, children getting killed, children being made into orphans, and wives losing their husbands. Like, that's what war means. You can make all the things that this is a necessary cost. It does mean that. And he did this in order to get reelected, right? So in order to keep his job, he allowed so many such suffering to continue. And no one seems to think, wait a minute, this is really sick and like just really depraved. And I had Jessica Tarlov on my show, and I do try to be as blue-pilled as possible in my thinking, in the sense of I would rather something have an obvious explanation and leave the so-called conspiracy or like Illuminati stuff for like things that really don't add up. And I read G. Gordon Liddy's book, Will, and it was one of the best autobiographies I've ever read. He was one of the Watergate burglars. And basically they left him out to dry. And he was up against he said that like the proudest moment of his life was he was facing down all 3 branches of government at the same time. Congress was subpoenaing him, the Supreme Court, and the executive, and he was saying, fuck you, and he went to jail. And at one point in the book, he was a bag man for Nixon. He worked deep state, whatever. He called his contact, I don't remember if it was the CIA or FBI, and he said, all right, listen, if you got to take me out, tell me what street corner to stand on, and I'll be there. I just don't want it to like come to my house and like scare my kids, right? So he's like, I'll take the bullet. And the guy says, this is according to Liddy, well, it hasn't come to that. So I don't think G. Gordon Liddy was making that up. And I don't think that that is remotely implausible. And what I asked Tarlov is, I go, if the president's job, any president, is to enact war and to cause maybe necessarily the deaths of many Americans, even forgetting foreigners who's we're going to not even pretend their lives matter. But he's going to, and those military families, and it's going to suck, right? Why wouldn't a person comfortable doing that take out one person who is in their way to maintaining their hold on power, which they think is the right thing to do, blah, blah, blah. And she was like, yeah, I guess you're right. Like, so yeah. I was waiting for her to be like, all right, let me rein you back in, Malice. Like, blah, blah, blah. You've been listening to too much Alex Jones. And she's like, no, I guess you're right. And I'm like, okay, shit. That's why I love talking to lefties and like, especially her. Like, me and Dave talk too much. Give me the sane Democrat perspective to be like, okay, blah, blah. And she's like, yeah, no, you're right.
But the weird thing to me, yeah, I watched that episode and that was a really interesting moment. But the crazy thing to me, and this is why it's hard to almost understand the blue pill mentality, is that moment didn't start the wheels turning in her head. Right. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's the fact that she could have that conversation, acknowledge that to you, and then go right back the next day as if that never happened. And if somebody said, Hannity said something about Seth Rich, she'd be like, oh, this is such a ridiculous conspiracy theory. I mean, they would never kill anybody. And it's like, but by your own logic, you just admitted, it's like, yeah, that actually does kind of add up. I mean, yeah, if you'd kill 100,000 people because there's this better, there's this ultimate goal that's more important, got to crack some eggs to make an omelet. If that's your mentality, why not take out a couple people along the way to make that omelet?
And in fact, I would even defend them. Like, if you knew that, like, it's like baby Hitler, right? If you know that this person is there, like, between like saving America and whatever the hell that means to your mind, and not, it's a really good it's easy to make the argument for targeted assassination over war. It's not a hard argument to make emotionally or morally or logistically. Yeah. So but I think I'll defend her snapping back, because it's one thing to hold something as a hypothesis. It is almost impossible psychologically to accept that which is my definition of the red pill, that what we are presented as fact in the corporate press is in fact a carefully constructed narrative designed to keep unpleasant people in power. It's really hard to be like, this is full-blown Truman Show, because then you have to do a lot of backtracking.
Yeah, and it's also it's something that we all in a way fall victim to or have to be on guard against. That there's tremendous I don't know if confirmation bias, I guess, is kind of what I'm describing. But like, I was thinking about this even watching the debate that I was watching the other day between Molyneux and Ben Burgess. And you watch these things and it's interesting how much it's all performance, because no one's in a position where they're really going to convince the other one, no matter how good of a point you make. No, because to accept that the other person has proven their case would be for you to then accept that you've been wrong about everything.
Yeah.
And your whole purpose of being is that you're right about this stuff. So me and you, us included in this, if we found some really good argument or some really strong argument that, anarchism is not actually viable, that'd be a very, very bitter pill for us to swallow. That'd be very tough. You go, oh, shit, I've been out here kind of speaking as an authority on this subject for a long time. And now I got to admit all of that was wrong. And what else do I have so why should anyone ever listen to me again if I was wrong about everything else? So that's something, if you want to be intellectually honest, you always got to kind of be on guard against and accept the possibility that you could be. But for a lot of these people, I mean, it's Noam Chomsky had a great piece about this once. I can't remember the title of it, but he was talking about how you're actually better off to listen to somebody who was like a titan of industry have a political opinion than an intellectual. Because if you're known because you built these big railroads or something, and then you have an opinion, well, you could change your mind and go, actually, I looked at the evidence, it's this way, and you still built these big railroads. But if you're an intellectual and you have to change your mind, It's like, well, that's your whole thing.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
like the railroads never existed.
There's an example I use constantly, and now I use it so much. Part of me is thinking, because I barely looked, I couldn't find the source, but I will say this with some certainty. It's a good, even as a folktale, like Aesop's Fable. And it was someone talking to Madeleine Albright, who was Clinton's Secretary of State, and this was in 2004. And they had asked her, and she asked the reporter, "Don't you think that like Bush and Cheney know where like Bin Laden is, and like if shit goes down, they're just gonna bust him out so they could get reelection?" And the person is like, "This is how crazy the left is, blah blah blah. They believe anything about Bush and Cheney." And I'm like, "Don't you think the Secretary of State probably has a really good understanding of how shit really works in Washington, especially vis-a-vis international politics, as opposed to you, Mr. Haha BuzzFeed listicle maker?" Like seriously, of these two, like me and you do not agree with Madeleine Albright on much. But if she sat me down and said, and if she wasn't trolling, and she goes, "This is how things actually work in international affairs," I would have no problem betting actual money that every single thing she says is largely factual.
Yeah.
It,
No,
it,
I agree. It's certainly worth listening to and thinking about.
and that titan of industry, yeah, like maybe he doesn't have a good philosophy behind it. He sure understands how things work to some extent.
Right.
He's figured something out. He's built something out of nothing. So that leads me to this question. What is the last time that someone, if ever, that someone has actually changed your mind on an issue on social media?
Ooh, I don't think on social media.
That's never
Ever.
happened. I have one that I could
Oh,
think of off the top
I mean,
of my
I've
head.
changed my mind about several things, but it
Sure.
wasn't a tweet or something like that that did it.
Let me tell you mine then, if you don't have an
Sure.
answer, maybe something will come to you. There was some libertarian group or something, and they were complaining about like cops killing black people, right? Like unequally. And I was just making the point, or someone else made the point, but let's presume it was me, that like, whoa, you'd rather, equally murdering people, like that's really an improvement for you? And he goes, yeah. And leaving aside whether cops disproportionately kill people of color, he goes, yeah, because if they were killing more people that look like Bloomberg's kids, maybe someone would do something about it. And I'm like, oh shit, that is actually a great argument for this kind of talking, where it's like, yeah, it's a lot. And we saw this with the AIDS crisis, right? It's a lot easier when everyone who's dying is localized to a population, and that population is them as opposed to us, just psychologically. If something doesn't affect anyone, just this is part of the North Korea stuff, and they're over there, it's a lot harder than if it's like, yeah, random people in your neighborhood are being taken to a gulag.
Yeah.
So that
Well,
really, really affected my thinking.
yeah, so I mean, I've changed my mind on abortion, immigration, other issues over the last few years, but the one that sticks out to me, and it didn't actually change my mind, but it really made me think, is Jesse Ventura. This was years ago, maybe 4 years ago or something like that, where I was listening to him in this interview, and he argued for two things that are both pretty anti-liberty. But he argued that we should have a draft and a war tax. And he actually had a very strong argument for both. It didn't convince me, but it really made me think about it a lot. But he was basically like, look, if we're going to go to war and say we have to go to war, then everyone's going to the war. We're actually going to feel it. Like, you got to sacrifice something too, and you got to pay for it now. No, just like, oh, we bribe the poor kids to go fight these wars, and we borrow the money from future generations who don't have a say. You want a war? Okay, then you have a draft and a war tax, and you pay for it right now. And of course, the idea is that this is what could actually lead to it stopping.
Yeah.
But ultimately, after thinking about it a lot, I was like, you know what? We had a draft in Vietnam. That war still went on for a really long time, and there's been war taxes before. It didn't stop the war, so I'm not ready to agree with it. But it was certainly an interesting thought experiment.
Well,
and to your thing, like, I don't know if I want to see kids who look like Michael Bloomberg's kids die just so that maybe he'll care about it. But I get the point. It's an interesting thought.
Well, I mean, it was also, the point was good that this isn't just virtue signaling or blah blah. I'm against racism. That there's actually could possibly be a positive, using that word loosely, outcome here if it's of interest to everyone that this is the case. So I thought that was like, wow, okay, you actually have a reason to back this up other than you're just pontificating about how much you care about minorities. So I thought that really kind of got that war thing. That is interesting. But the point I think I would make, and you'd probably agree, is the issue with any system is that the elites are always going to have a workaround. Yeah. And just like with like, oh, if you tax the rich, yeah, what ends up happening is that they'll have their tax attorneys and they're going to have their loopholes. And then what ends up happening is the upper middle class gets taxed. And that's really not serving the purpose that you want, except creating this moat between the middle and upper middle class and the actual wealthy. And that moat gets harder and harder to cross.
Yes, no, I think you're absolutely right. And that's in many ways the problem with government from top to bottom.
So Jesse Ventura had a show, was it called Conspiracy?
I think conspiracy
theory or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
So basically he analyzed every conspiracy theory, so on and so forth, and interviewed people. And I met either the executive producer, someone high up in the show hierarchy, when I was in LA, and I was picking his brain. I'm like, all right, like how much of this? And he was basically like, okay, it's all bullshit. Like most, like whatever, blah, blah, blah. He goes, but he goes, when we went to, I think it's either called, I'm 99% sure it's called Skinwalker Ranch. It might be called Skywalker Ranch. And this is not a known place like Area 51, but it's like second tier. He goes, there was some crazy shit we were seeing in the sky. He's like, that I can't explain. Now, he wasn't saying, oh, I met an alien, but he's saying, I got bugged out for real. So I thought that was really kind of interesting to see. I had this tweet, and I would love to hear your thoughts. I'm sure you're going to agree, but I was really proud of it, where I said, in this country, you could go after the family, gays, the president, Supreme Court, abortion, pro-choice, NRA, teachers unions, colleges, CNN, Fox, the universe, everything. Only the cops. Only when you go after the CIA is your sanity immediately called into question. No other agency, when you go after them, are they like, oh, you're a crazy person. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, I really thought you were building toward the Jews there, but okay, we're going CIA instead. All right. Yeah, it's that there is something about that, and it isn't that old quote that isn't really Voltaire's quote, but people say that it's a Voltaire quote, but they go, if you want to know who rules us, it's the person you can't question or can't criticize, something like that. Yeah, it is pretty interesting. I also think that it kind of demonstrates your whole thesis of your last book about progressivism being a religion, of that the cathedral, that for all these things that, because nowadays, like questioning God, questioning Christianity, questioning any of that shit is completely fine. And this would in many societies throughout the world, this would be like really not an okay thing to do.
Death sentence.
Yes, but it is, truthfully, if you question anything about multiculturalism, anything about, the anti-racism narrative, or to be fair, anything about Jewish power and influence, that is like an immediate, you are evil, you are out of here, you should be expelled from polite society. It's a very strange thing, because throughout history, you can't really think of too many societies like it was so the opposite. Just going back, if you go back to like 1965 and before, you could question anything you wanted to about other races, about Jewish control, about any of these things. But questioning like God, family, military, the police, things like that would get you in a lot of trouble. We've completely flipped it.
That's not, Henry Ford got in a lot of shit for this, because he had a newspaper called The International Jew.
And he wrote a book on international Jewry.
Yeah, and he was really read out of town on a rail. There's this amazing book, which I just recently read, called Beyond Belief. And it's one of those books, there's a few books where I'm like, everyone should read. This is one of them. This woman, I forget her, Deborah Eisenstadt, she talks about, and this is just, I think you would find it absolutely fascinating, how did the press and what were the hot takes in Germany as Hitler came to power and rose in power? And it's all over the place. We would think it was it's very counterintuitive. And she also explains a lot of it, because they would have these pogroms, right? And things were happening, violence against Jews in the street. And the hot take was, this just shows how weak Hitler is, because he can't even control the thugs on the street. Hitler doesn't have much time to get to last. So it's just funny seeing the same kind of blue check mentality then. And then Kristallnacht happens. And then everyone was like, oh shit, and then when the Holocaust started happening, there was little information coming out, and people were like, it can't really be this. This is, I mean, these reports are so over the top, come on. So they took the actual journalists who were skeptical to the camps, and they go, you fucking look at this. And they're like, okay, so I guess our hot takes weren't so hot. So this book is really, really interesting because, again, this wasn't social media. You didn't really have video cameras everyone has on their phone. So the limited information, them trying to present a narrative that also coincided with the image of we're civilized now. It's the 20th century. You know, we don't have barbarism, certainly not a leader of a Western country, blah, blah, blah. So it's really kind of interesting to see.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And of course, by the time the Holocaust actually started, the press in Germany had been pretty locked down.
Oh,
and
yeah.
a lot of newspapers had been shut down that were critical of the
way before
Nazi
that. Way
Party.
before
Yeah.
that. I mean, he came for the newspaper people like pretty early.
Yeah.
So, okay, we are running out of time. What has been your favorite part of this interview?
My favorite part of every interview with you is just staring into your beautiful eyes.
You, Blue, are welcome.